Welcome back to Rowing on the Square, the podcast. Today I want to talk about return to row and what does that mean as an athlete or as a coach. For athletes, you have to start thinking about you're going to be piecing your erging or your rowing back together. You might have to think about not doing practice 5 days a week to start off with, or not doing practice where you're going to do the whole practice. You may have to do half the practice. Some of my athletes, if it's the beginning of the season, if they're a high school athlete, I can say to them, look, we're only going to do 2 practices this week. And in between each of the other practices, you're going to rest. You're not necessarily going to get on the erg in general. We need to see what your body's tolerance is as you're going back to practice. The big thing is we talk about a lot is pain. If you're having pain, pain's to be expected if you have an injury. What we want to make sure that we're doing is we're tracking that pain. We're paying attention to it spiking and what helps it. We want to try to be doing things throughout the day that relieve your pain. I call them resets. I like to talk to my athletes about motions that make them feel better and how can we put those motions into practice when you're starting to feel that pain increase. You're at school, you're sitting, the back end pain starts to increase. I want you to, next time you have the opportunity to stand up to do your extensions or to do your rotations, do those resets to bring your pain back down. So the example would be you're sitting in class and your pain goes up to 3-4. You know, if you stand up and you do 5 extensions and 5 rotations to each side, you feel better. You can get your pain back down to 1. So the expectation for that athlete is that they're doing those things during the day to bring their pain number back down. The idea when you get on the erg or you're getting out of the water, pain is 3-4. To start, you may start your workout, pain goes up to 5-6. We're doing short stints of working out. Not necessarily it would be something you'd be doing on the water, but something you'd be doing on the erg. You'll do your 5 minutes. You'll say that your pain's 5-6. You'll do your reset motions, get the pain back down to 3-4 or 2-3, and then you get back out of 10. Of course, is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the general pain scale, with 0 being none and 10 the most you've ever felt. We want to see that we're getting you back into a range that's comfortable. If you're going out on the water and you're going out with your team, I'll often suggest to my athletes that they row only half of the practice, and that the other half of the practice they either switch out with someone or that there's an opportunity to take that person out of the boat. I know that's not an opportunity that every team has. No one likes to row a 7. I get that. But this is going to help you as you progress and as you're moving through your rehab. So say you're practicing 2 times a week, you only do the row out the one time, and maybe you do the row back on the other time. That's the other thing that I try to tell athletes is be aware of conditions. So in Rochester, we row on a river. The river flow starts to increase. Most boats go out against the current and they come back with the current. So if you're someone who's an athlete and there's maybe 2 injured athletes on your team, you're going to row out on day 1, but you should row back on day 2. So you should always get a balance of what the conditions are. We always have to think about conditions when you have an injury. If you're rowing in conditions, that means that you are going to be putting your injury at greater risk for being more painful after you finish your row. So conditions would include increased current. Conditions would include increased wind, current and wind, and air temperature if it's very cold. You can imagine trying to get my high school athletes to put some leggings on and some long sleeves is a challenge, even when it's 20 or 30 degrees in Rochester and the water's warmer, but the air is still every once in a while getting cold. We want to make sure that that you're protecting that injury and not taking that injury to the extremes where you're using that joint that's painful, then going and sitting in a cold, icy launch all the way back to the boathouse. and getting very, very cold all of a sudden. So you want to make sure that if you're switching in and out, that you have gear that's waiting for you, that's dry in the coach's launch. And that takes a little bit of planning ahead. You got to make sure that you're bringing the things that you need. I recommend, long sleeves, full pants. Make sure that you keep your body as covered and protected as possible. You don't want to aggravate an injury because you got too cold and you were shivering all the way back to the boathouse. From a coach's perspective, as far as having injured athletes, I completely understand. I coached high school for a while, and I know how it is when you have a couple athletes who do have to do this merry-go-round of jumping in and out of the boat, and someone's injured and not feeling well. I know how much pressure that puts on coaches. So I sympathize with that. Something we can do from a coaching perspective is make sure that the rig is as friendly as possible to our injured athletes, making sure that we give them the opportunity to have clams on their oar, up to 2 of them, to make the load not be as difficult for them to manage. Teaching them about foot placement, really being particular about what their stroke looks like, the mechanics of what it looks like. Should they be rowing port versus starboard based on their injury? Do they need to row sculling versus sweep because of the injury? All of those things can kind of fall into the coach's umbrella of things that they should take care of. So thinking about that, having ways to reduce the load, looking at positioning, making sure that they're not laying back too much, make sure they're not over compressing, making sure that they understand what their position and how they should use their body on the water is extremely important. It's from a coaching aspect and injury. I know that as a coach, you have to make a decision at one point or another whether this athlete can tolerate the amount of time and practice that needs to happen in order to compete. We all understand that you have to row the warm up down the course to get to the starting line, and then you also have to row the actual race. So being able to judge whether your athletes are able to tolerate all that goes into getting back on the water and returning to row is super important for coaches. Remember that you have resources. Reach out and ask me questions. Talk to your athletic trainers. Bring your trainers out so they can understand what the pressures are and what the parameters of what these kids need to do to get back out on the water. If you're a master's team, I know it can be a little bit more difficult because you don't necessarily have a medical professional who's helping your team out. But taking the time to talk to your injured athletes, make sure that you understand what aggravates their injury, what makes it better. Are there stretches that they could be doing in between pieces that would help to act as resets so that they can stay in the boat longer? Asking those questions and opening up those lines of communication can really help bridge the gap between returning to row and continuing to sit on the shore. We know that returning to row is difficult because rowing is a lot of all or nothing, because we can't sit on the bench when we start to feel bad. There's a lot of different moving parts that all kind of have to fit together in order for a rowing practice to happen. And so as we bring people back from injury, back to wellness, and with the team, we have to make these adjustments. But if we make these adjustments the right way, we'll be able to get more of our athletes back out there and in the boat.